Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our inaugural city council meeting for the 2023 calendar year. It's Thursday, January 5th, 7 p.m. We're in Trade and Transit 2. Please rise for the invocation by Councilwoman Bonnie Katz, followed by our flag salute and roll call.
With the start of the new year, let's pray for renewed energy and insight. We ask for your guidance to open our eyes and minds to bring us answers, successfully keep our city on the right track. We also ask for good health and safekeeping for all, and thank you for all you have blessed us with. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Frank, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Allison.
Here.
Mr. Mackey.
Here.
Mr. Pelisi.
Here.
Mr. Bider.
Here.
Ms. Mealy, absent. Mrs. Katz.
Here.
Mr. Yoder.
Here, we have a quorum of 6. Item 3, approval of city council meeting minutes from December 8th, 2022. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Any comments, questions, concerns with the meeting minutes? Hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Item 4, limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests tonight. Item 5, nominations for president of city council and vote. So for the third class optional charter, we are required to reorganize every year. We are doing that this year in an off election year at our regularly scheduled meeting, just to kind of maximize time here a little bit. So I will open the floor for nominations for city council president. Mr. Allison.
I'd like to nominate Adam Yoder for the council president.
We have a nomination. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a nomination as second. Are there other nominations for city council president? I know.
Just making sure it wasn't me.
All right, seeing no other nominations, I will close the floor for nominations. We can take the vote on the nomination. Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
No.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes. In the spirit of never mind. Well played, John. Well played. Well played.
We don't have to vote again, do we?
No, we've got a majority. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to serving with you again this year, and I appreciate the confidence. And from you, Randy and John, thank you very much from 2 people that I like to call friends and really look up to. It means a lot. We'll move to item 6, nominations for vice president of city council. I'll open the floor for nominations. Are there any nominations? Mr. Pelisi.
I would like to nominate Councilwoman Bonnie Katz.
Is there a second to that nomination?
Second.
I will second that. We have a nomination and a second. Are there other nominations for city council vice president? Okay. I see none, so I will close the floor for nominations. We will go to the vote. Mrs. Frank.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, Mrs. Katz's motion passes 6-0. Congratulations. Look forward to serving with you again this year. Thank you. All right, we'll move to item 7. We have an introduction of 2 new firefighters Josh Conkle and Dakota Luce, and I hope I pronounced those correctly. Apologies if I did not. I will turn it over to Deputy Chief Lucas. Good evening, sir, and welcome all three of you.
Good evening, President Yoder, members of council administration. Chief Sam sends his apologies. He couldn't make it tonight. He had a mild medical procedure done. The Williamsport Bureau of Fire is pleased to introduce Joshua Conkle and Dakota Luce. Josh and Dakota were hired on August 8th, 2022. And both have successfully completed. They graduated from Hack Harrisburg Area Community College. Josh is a 2016 graduate of Montoursville High School and recently worked for the city of Altoona Fire Department as a firefighter. With family ties to the fire service since the 1960s, Josh is well versed with fire experience and has personally been involved for the past 11 years. And his father's here as the fire chief of Montoursville. Dakota is also a 2016 graduate from Penns Valley High School and attended Hack and received a fire science technology degree. Dakota previously worked at First Quality as a laborer and brings his 10 years of volunteer fire service knowledge with him. Dakota also has family ties to the fire service, with his father being a firefighter paramedic, as well as a full-time police officer. And all the women in his life are RNs for surrounding hospitals. The Williamsport Bureau of Fire is honored to have these two young, fine men join the ranks of a firefighter with the city of Williamsport. We expect great things from both men and are looking forward to a very rewarding career with the Williamsport Bureau of Fire. Thank you.
Anything that the two of you would like to? You don't have to, it's okay. I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Not fear. Same.
Well, nice to meet you both. And looking forward to working with you and looking forward to you serving our community. We're very fortunate where we have a very high qualified, very high caliber fire department here in the city of Williamsport. And you know, they're relied on very, very heavily. So it's really exciting to see two high caliber professionals coming into our department, and the two of you, and just thank you for serving the city. Thank you for serving the community. And it's going to be tough, but I know you're up to it. So any comments from other members of council? Mr. Allison.
Yeah, I got to shake their hands a few minutes ago, but I just like to echo those sentiments. Welcome aboard. We're so glad to have you step up. You know, I'm well versed in what our fire department does, and I know they're one of the best, I think, in the state. Very excellent. I've heard nothing but good things about the Montoursville Fire Department as well, though. So I think there's a good relationship there. And I think our area can be proud of that. And but you know, we're excited to see you step up to serve and keep this community safe. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both very much and welcome. Okay, we're gonna jump here for an item. Let me find it. Where is item 15, Mrs. Frank?
A resolution awarding real estate broker services to Fish Commercial Group.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. I will welcome Mr. Sander to the podium. Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Thank you. So what you have before you is a resolution to hire Fish Commercial Group to market and sell the existing City Hall building. Representatives from Fish are here this evening. Previously, a lot of documentation had been provided to council in regards to the appraisal and other repairs that the building was in need of. This resolution was reviewed ahead of time by Austin, city solicitor, Austin White, that is. So with this resolution to hire Fish Commercial Group, if awarded, their contract agreement would be for 1 year, and the fee would be either 6% of the purchase price of the building or $20,000, whichever is greater. And this was discussed in Public Works on Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Sander. This was discussed in Public Works. Mrs. Katz?
Yes, it was.
Tony Nardi and
Yes.
Tiffany Chopi are back there. Your mic, Bonnie. Thank you.
We did discuss this at Public Works. And the cost of what's going to happen here is either 6% or $20,000, whichever is higher. From what we understood is you're also going to advertise this throughout the country, and it's a one-year contract. There also is a deed restriction, which is kind of, it's kind of hard to understand how that can be played out in the end, okay? Because if somebody buys that building, how are we guaranteed what's going to be saved there? I do have a question for Norm and the mayor. Was there an RFP sent out for this?
Yes, there was.
There was,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
So, didn't. Building, which is going to limit some of the structuring and things like that. And we discussed all of this, and I think, we're all hesitant from the standpoint of we all love that building. We who have worked in that building for many years, and it breaks our heart that we're not in that building at this point. We are looking at what the plans might be, who will purchase this building. We're concerned that it's going to maintain its integrity. And that's one of our biggest things, to maintain the integrity of the building itself. I think I'll open this up to the committee. Okay, that we discussed this. Vince, Randy? Do you have any statements to make?
No, thank you, Bonnie. No, I just want to say that with Fish Real Estate representing the city on the listing and the sale of this building. They've obviously worked very hard over the past years to develop and create a very good reputation for sale of properties, for good quality properties, and making sure that they're sold to good quality buyers. So with that, I'm confident in their ability and their wide net, so to speak. So I'm looking forward to seeing what offers are brought.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions?
Um,
Mr. Allison?
Just briefly on the whole process, I think, we should all be well aware, and I think we are, of the uniqueness of this particular transaction and the hurdles that might be in the way or the opportunities that may be there. It's kind of a lot of unknowns now. And particularly in the present economic climate, you never know how that's going to affect things now. So, I think it's going to be an adventure for everyone as we go through this. And they're going to be in close contact with the administration, with us. So we'll all do our best to see this come to a good conclusion for everybody.
Certainly, and thank you, Mr. Allison. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Bider?
My objection to this is that has no reflection upon the ability of Fish Real Estate to carry out this contract. Obviously, being a local company, being involved in the community for 50 years, the expertise that you bring to the table is without question some of the best in the area. My objection to this comes from the future, the unknown. Not knowing who will come into the area potentially, or a local person to purchase this, and then what will happen with that building without any kind of mechanism in place for the city to ensure the future integrity of that property and the historic nature of that property. I'm very concerned about selling it at this point.
We in fact can put mechanisms in place too. Yes.
And that is exactly what I want to do. But until we get to that point, I cannot support this right now as it sits. But it is not something that I don't support overall.
Thank you, Mr. Bider. A couple of questions, and if this came out in Public Works, my apologies. So this is a one-year contract. What's the realistic timeline for, this process from your end, to play out? I mean, is a year enough time? Any idea?
That's a tough question to answer, of course,
I
because
figured.
as we all know, there's a lot of issues here that would have to be addressed.
Mhm.
We're certainly all on board, I believe, with Councilman Biter on the concern of the end use of this building and preserving it. So whether a year is enough to actually close on the property or not, maybe not. But certainly we need at least a year for the marketing effort to make sure that we secure a viable buyer.
Okay, so a year. I mean, if it happens sooner, it happens sooner by some miraculous feat, but a year is realistic, longer is realistic also.
Sure.
Okay. And then I guess my other question is for the administration. So we're leasing from RVTA right now. We had open discussions about transitioning over to Third Street Plaza, at least on an interim basis. If leasing is a long-term strategy, I think that's to be determined. But aside from that, what's the long-term plan for where we're ultimately going to be?
Well, I think we'll all that simultaneously. So I think we'll look at what lease options are out there. I think we also have to look at what other maybe purchase buildings may be out there to rehab, as well as new construction. So if we find a parcel that either has a building that's maybe old that we could demolish to build a new structure, or maybe there's a parcel that's already blank where we could build a new modern, all ADA compliant, new technology, all that. So I think we can simultaneously explore all of those options while still looking to sell City Hall, maintain obviously the integrity of the building, make sure that whoever the successful purchaser is adheres to all the things that we want to see, and then explore those options. So I think, again, we have time. It's not like we have to make the decision tomorrow. I know we talked about a little bit during budget, but that's, I would think, that we explore short-term, long-term, and the long-term to me is, obviously in a perfect world, structure needs that's modern, 2-story or 3-story, which, municipalities are doing at this point, where they're just building what they need to the scale they need, and not worrying about, rehabbing a 100-year-old building. So that's how I see it moving forward. And as we said during budget, exploring, the near term or the short term, what lease options might be available to us, and if that makes more sense than what we're currently in.
Thank you for that. I appreciate Mr. Biter's concerns, and I have some follow-up questions to that specifically more for Norm. The big concern I have is divesting this without having that final solution in place. It makes it, whether we should or shouldn't be there is a valid question. I get that. I get nervous divesting a property that we could invest in for a long-term home without having a different long-term strategy figured out. That makes me a little bit nervous. And I'll echo Mr. Biter's sentiments. We couldn't be in better hands with Fish Real Estate. I believe you were the only ones that responded to the RFP. Frankly, I would suspect you would have beat everybody out anyway. So we are very fortunate, and I'm confident you will do a very good job. But I am a bit nervous from just, I guess, a risk management perspective. Norm, for us to, I think, maybe address a couple of the concerns that Mr. Biter had on the deed, walk us through that process. I'm assuming we could do that, in the near future as they're starting their process, but can you just, for everybody's sake, walk us through what we need to do to mitigate that or take care of that, address the deed?
Essentially, we're counting on Fish to bring us a potential purchase. Any agreement of sale would have to be approved by City Council,
Okay.
so that what the ultimate terms are If it's still city councils and the developer or purchasers, reaching an agreement. If you want to put certain deed restrictions in there, that's something that we could put in the agreement of sale. And then ultimately in the deed itself.
Okay.
Yeah, because currently there are deed restrictions on the property.
Yeah.
And, the government put those on, when the city purchased it. We can put additional deed restrictions on. And the advantage of putting them in the deed is it's recorded and anyone who looks at it.
Yep.
Will see, what, any potential second or third purchaser.
Okay.
And also the other thing is that if, for example, they find somebody 2 weeks from now, obviously the closing date would have to be pushed back for the city to move whatever's still in City Hall out.
Okay.
So also you'd have that control also of when would the closing date be?
Okay.
And if they're going to redevelop the property itself, they have to come and meet, the code requirements. To make it, that's to comply with the property maintenance code, with the building code, those type of things, and also obviously zoning. So, it's not something that's going to close in 2 months, realistically.
And the appropriate time to probably look at instituting those types of items would be as somebody's identified as we approach an agreement of sale, correct?
Yeah, or an identifiable buyer in the sense of
Okay.
someone is interested in buying it, and this is what they intend to do with it. Then it
Okay.
gets fleshed out in the agreement of sale and also negotiating with the buyer.
So Mr. Biter, to
And-
answer, I think a couple of your
So the-
questions on process.
As a practical matter, Fish Real Estate does not have the authority to bind the city at this point. If you want to give them that authority, that's one thing. I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah,
but-
understood.
And
Understood.
I don't think they want it.
Understood.
Yeah, from working with Fish over the years.
Yeah.
Never have a problem with them, with that office.
No, I don't think will either. I don't think that at all. So, okay.
Mr. Lubin, if I may,
Go
have you
ahead.
expand a little bit. So the situation that, Lundy Construction, I'll use them as the example, with the prior city hall. They purchased that from the city for $1 and I
Yes.
believe it was 1971, 1972. Somewhere in
No,
that
it's
neighborhood.
later than that.
I'm sorry.
It was in the early 80s that they purchased it.
Okay. So they purchased that in the 80s then,
Yes.
when the city moved out of it. The deed restrictions that were placed on that particular building, now that building's changed hands several times since then. Are we able to put a 100-year deed restriction, a 200-year deed restriction? When does that expire or
Deed restrictions ordinarily do not expire unless you put an expiration date in it. For example, it has to be used for commercial purposes for the first 10 years. That would expire after 10 years. That's what I mean, where the agreement of sale would list what conditions the city desires to impose. And also, in the interim, if council reaches some type of understanding of what restrictions that they do want, it obviously would assist Fish in marketing as to looking for potential purchasers. But the agreement of sale back in, the early 80s to Lundy was, done on a $1 basis at that time.
that was with the understanding that they would rehab the building?
Yes, and they did obviously rehabbed it and did a very good job with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biter. And Mr. Lubin, thank you very much for addressing that that question and a little bit on process. Kind of circling back to the risk thing. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. My apologies. Like I said, I'm a little uncomfortable with that. If we're looking at realistically probably a year, I would really like to see the administration have that figured out by the time this is brought forward for an agreement for sale. Right? I think that is a reasonable expectation. And I mean, are you gonna find a property, buy it, get plans for buildings drawn up in a year? No, you're not going to. But I do think we can have a strategy in place, rough cost estimates, et cetera, so we can begin that process of whatever that future is. I would like to see that from the administration before an agreement for sale of this property is brought forward. That doesn't impact Fish Real Estate at all. That's more of a target for the administration. We absolutely need to see that. We've fallen short, I think a little bit here and there on prior asks. I think that's a necessary requirement, at least for me to vote to sell the building when we get to that point. So that's what I will be looking for if and when we get to that point. So any other comments or questions from Mr. Pelisi?
Thank you. No, just to speak to Mr. Biter's reservations. So I too had same regarding the sale. Able to institute certain mechanisms for making sure that City Hall is sold to a responsible developer, whomever it may be. Mechanisms such as requesting to see proof of funds for said development when it be brought to us. The deed restrictions that we may want to institute. The last thing I think any of us want to see is this building of ours be sold to a developer who may only have enough money to buy it, but then it sits and becomes a white elephant. None of us want that to happen. We want to make sure that it's taken care of in a manner that reflects Williamsport's history there with it. So after I learned these things, that we could institute these mechanisms, that we could make these requests, and then ultimately that City Council would have the final vote on approving the sale or not. That's why I'm supporting it. At least then we get a chance to see whom Fish might be able to find that has an interest in City Hall and what ideas that they may be bringing forward for what possible, the market rate apartments, high-end restaurant and wedding venue. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but we won't know until we see what Fish is able to bring to the table. So with knowing that we can institute those mechanisms, and then ultimately we have the final vote on whether or not we're going to approve the sale. That's why, I'd like to see at least this kind of move forward and see what's out there, what possibilities we may have for it. And in the interim, if something does come up, if we decide to change focus on where we're going to ultimately end up with city government, again, we can make those, we can pivot should we need to. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Pelisi. Mr. Allison.
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Pelisi, and I also I think it makes every sense to do this. I take a different view. I believe going through this process will get us to our endpoint quicker, because we'll identify whether there is a true demand for this building and what kind of possible economic benefit it can be to us. And it'll help us to decide on some of these other things. I've said this before. I don't think that building is suited for city government as it's now construed and how it now functions. And we always, when we're talking about that building, we always have to consider the police. They're not going to be coming back. So, it just makes sense to me to go ahead with this to identify some of those important things, and that will help us, I think, make our decision. There's a risk in anything. For me, I don't have that high of a level of concern about that, because I think there's enough time and opportunity to avoid that during the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Any other comments or questions, Mr. Mackey?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo those sentiments. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, listen, it's no secret, I'm not a history for history's sake guy. I've never been, see all of my comments on brick streets. This building, it's an amazing building. It's a beautiful building. It served its purpose. And, to get City Hall as it sits now back to where it needs to be for, as you said, Randy, to be used as a government building again, I think is unrealistic. I think we've determined that. And it's time to sell it. So, and I can appreciate everybody's concerns, but to Norm's strategy, I think is the best way to go. I mean, we start putting restrictions all over this thing, it's just gonna do what it's doing now and sitting there empty. So, I know this isn't just like selling your house and you have a personal attachment to your house, but once you sell your house, it's not your house anymore. And whoever bought it has the right to do what they want to do with it. So, that's kind of where I'm at. So.
And certainly understood again. I mean, to both your points, and Mayor Slaughter said this, they want to figure this out simultaneously. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. We absolutely need to see that 100%. We can't continue to kick this can down the road since we've been out of there. So any other comments, or Mrs. Katz? Mike, please.
Go ahead.
Norm, I'm curious, what was the deed restriction when we moved into City Hall?
The exterior could not be changed.
And that was it?
It was primarily devoted to the exterior and then different governmental approvals that were required in the event there was a request.
So it's more or less what we're asking at this point too, with the sale of this building to maintain the integrity of the outside.
Well, it would still continue from the old
Right.
deed.
Because
That would
it's
be
historic
incorporated
building.
into the new deed. And, if there's any other restrictions, that everybody agrees to, and I mean, also the purchaser. And I would suspect there also would probably be a developer's agreement with whoever purchased it. And I think was the agreements that you approved the other week with Habitat, where they had so much time to develop the property, or it goes back to redevelopment. So that's another restriction you can place in there, which I think is primarily the concern of everybody is you don't want to sell the property and then have a developer, sit on it for a couple of years.
I think that's our biggest fear, that would happen.
That's why you could put that type of requirement in either the deed itself or primarily with the developer's agreement.
Just, I'm curious. So you have a developer that comes in and I've seen this throughout the city when you have a developer that takes older buildings and they start tearing it apart, the budget is blown right away because they come into things that they didn't expect in the building. What happens is the developer does not have enough money to finish this?
Well, if you put a restriction in there that if they're not completed within a certain, don't forget, building permits are only good for 2 years.
Okay.
And ordinarily they can be renewed. There's no problem with that. The thing is that, you want the developer to start and maybe even be put completion requirements in the developer's agreement. So that, they have to start within so many, for example, get the building permit within, say, 6 months or something like that. And you also it has to be realistic of what the person or company intends to do with the property. Is it a realistic proposal?
Which when that would come to us, we'd be able to justify those.
Any agreements?
Means.
Any agreements obviously have to be approved by a majority of city council. So it'll come back to you, even with the, I understand the concerns of Mr. Biter is that somehow Mr. Nardi has a buyer in his hip pocket. He's going to come back in tomorrow with it.
I would love it if you did.
I know, so would we all. But, you know, as a realistic matter, it's gonna take time.
And I do agree with, Madam Yoder that, you know, I really would like to see plans in the works for where we're going to go further on. We don't want to be renters for the rest of our lives. And that's, I think that's what we want. We want a statement place where people know that it's our city hall. So I agree with what you made that statement with. And that's all I have.
Thank you all. Any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Franklin, the motion, please.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
No.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 5-1. Okay, we will move up to item 8. We have appointments and reappointments, and I apologize. I normally, members for Fish, thank you for being here very much, and thank you for working with us. So we will move to appointments, and with them online, or if they're here, I apologize. I normally do them first, and it completely slipped my mind. So we'll do Board of Health first. We have Rosellen Wenzel at 17 Fairview Ave. She is appointed to a 5-year term commencing on 1/5/23, ending on 1/3/28. Is there a motion in a second?
So moved.
Motion in a second. So Rosellen, put her name in to serve on the Board of Health. Our city clerk, helped with this one as well. Janice, thank you. Rosellen was interviewed in the ERC committee. Mr. Bider, care to speak to that discussion a little bit?
Rosellen being a city resident for her entire life, over in the East End. She retired from the Williamsport Area School District, in 2017, and she was a special education teacher for 37 years, primarily in grade 6 and the secondary education level. Went to Mansfield University and Bloomsburg University, where she got her master's degree. She and her husband both were teachers as well. But as I said to her, with that experience being on the Board of Health, having a very different perspective is invaluable. Specifically, that skill set is one that we probably wouldn't find too many people to have within the city limits. So to have her be willing to step up and volunteer for this position on the Board of Health is fantastic.
Thank you, Mr. Bider. I couldn't agree more. She'll be a huge asset for us on the Board of Health. Absolutely. Any comments or questions for Ms. Wenzel's nomination for the Board of Health? Okay, I don't believe she's online, Chris. Okay, and that's okay. All right, hearing seen none, Mrs. Frank on the motion for Rosellen Wenzel.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0, and then we have two supported by the mayor for the Veterans Memorial Park Commission. We have Ken Freeze on Round Hill Road, appointed to a term commencing January 5th, 23, ending 1/1/27. We have Don Young being reappointed to a term commencing 1/5/23 and ending 1/1/27. Is there a motion and a second for the Veterans Memorial Park Commission?
So moved.
Appointees? Motion and a second, Mayor Slaughter.
Yes, good evening, President Yoder, Vice President Katz, members of council. As President Yoder mentioned, you have Mr. Feast to an appointment and Mr. Young to a reappointment. Mr. Young has done a fantastic job as a member of our Veterans Memorial Park Commission. And we're looking forward to having Mr. Feast serve on that commission. It's a great park, as we all know, and they do a great job up there. And I believe this was reviewed in ERC, I think.
Yes. Yes, they were. Mr. Bider, care to talk about the discussion ERC?
Pull their paper up here. Which gentleman was it?
Is Mr. Markley.
Mr. Markley. So Mr. Markley, Mr. Markley been on that particular board for a number of years now. So this is a reappointment for him.
No, he was the one that was there representing them.
He was representing, excuse me.
Yeah.
Kenneth Feast, which was the gentleman that
Yeah,
that put together the monument for the Gold Star families?
Mr. Feast.
yeah, that was Mr. Feast, yeah.
It was Mr. Feast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I thought you meant.
That was just a very
Sorry.
big point that I couldn't pick out really quick reading that. So one thing that I do want to comment on and point out, Mr. Feast took it upon himself to gather the funding for a monument specifically for Gold Star families in the area. And nobody sacrifices more than the individual members, but specifically their families and then those Gold Star families themselves. So it's extremely important that we have something like that as well. So that was just a big highlight that I wanted to bring. But overall, two gentlemen that bring a lot to it and have the passion and dedication for that particular park.
Thank you, Mr. Biter. Yeah, I would agree. Or it's a jewel was last year memorial dedicated Gold Star monument, and ceremony was. I mean, if you didn't get goosebumps, then there's something wrong with you. It was just phenomenal, and it's a beautiful addition to that park. The dedication of both of these individuals is prevalent, but definitely Mr. Feast with his efforts in that. You know, we've got good people on that commission, and I'm excited that Mr. Young is being reappointed and Mr. Feast is being added. They do amazing work, and I'm excited to see it continue. Any comments or questions on the appointments for the Veterans Memorial Park Commission from other members of council? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank, on the motion for the appointments for the Park Commission.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Ida,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. We'll move to item 9, Mrs. Frank.
An ordinance amending part 1 of the codified ordinances of the city of Williamsport, creation of an emergency and reserve fund for the city of Williamsport in final reading.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. So this is final reading of the ordinance creating the emergency reserve fund. So during the budget sessions or votes, excuse me, in December last year, we moved some money around and allocated a good chunk of money to get this capitalized. This is the ordinance just simply codifying some of the technical details on how can money get removed for it, what's the intent of it, and a couple of items surrounding some sustainable ways to continually fund it. So I think everybody was here except for you, Randy, for first reading. So this was initially reviewed in finance. There were some recommendations from Ms. Rash, and we worked through those and incorporated them and got them included in the first reading. So there's no additional recommended changes from Tracy. We were able to flush a lot of that out during first reading, but that's kind of the background of the story. So any questions or comments from members of council on second reading? Mr. Allison.
Yeah. The under, well, the letter C, surplus funds, any monies received by the city treasurer in excess of the budgeted amounts in the city's most recent adopted general budget fund shall be deposited into the emergency and reserve fund. Okay, does that mean like if more funds come in from fees and permits, construction, that kind of thing, that it would go? Okay.
No, so that's a very good question. It was actually one of the points that Tracy had noted. So this is specifically funds that are collected by the treasurer. So tax revenue specifically. So for example, if the police are bringing in some kind of a reimbursement revenue from services they're working with outside the city, or for the events that happen in the city, that would not be included in that. Permits
Okay.
would not be, but, business privilege tax would be.
Mhm.
So if collections are higher than budgeted, the surplus, not what's budgeted, but the surplus
Right.
would go into there, and through budget cycle, if needed, we could move that back somewhere. If
Okay.
needed as well. So that was the language, and the idea was pulled from a different municipality in Pennsylvania that does that. I thought it was an interesting approach to having some kind of just continual sustainability to try to continue to build this up, because in addition to emergencies, this is a way for us to reserve money for
Mhm.
the really big things that we just struggle to figure out, right? And that take more than a year or two to do, like the levy and refuse run, so.
It's just, yeah, like it said, any monies received by the city treasurer, I guess I interpreted that as, because they receive all the money, so. It comes in, so, I just wondered about that. And also, so as you explained it, can emergency and reserve fund. I didn't know how restricted that title was about getting the money out for different purposes. So, maybe it
Yeah, certainly. So.
just takes the 2/3 vote to get it. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so essentially it's up to future councils to determine what's an emergency or what qualifies as a, project that reserve money should go to.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
and purposely, it takes 2/3 of all members. So for instance, if there's only 4 of us here, that those 4 can't take money out of that. You need all 7. So.
Okay. What, and what does that accomplish, making it that restricted?
I think making sure that, it's not used for non-emergency and non, big things, we get into. So for instance, I think there's a big difference in, I think there's a big difference in, I don't think balancing our budget would qualify as an emergency of using this money, right? Because we know that's an issue and we can plan around that issue, for example, versus the levy. Like, yeah, it's a big thing to a place to stash money away, and it doesn't necessarily work for a capital project, right? Once we get into a situation where we are starting to tackle, projects related to that, we can start putting that into capital projects and that kind of thing. But the idea was to just make sure that that it wasn't, I don't want to say a hardcore restrictive, but not super easy either to get money out of this, and to make sure that all members of council had a voice in how this money was used when it was visited.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Mhm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Allison. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions from members of council? Okay. Hearing see none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Mr. Allison,
No.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes,
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 5-1. We'll move to item 10.
An ordinance in first reading, providing for preferred residency for city employees.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Good evening, Molly.
Good evening. So as you are aware, in 2020, an ordinance was codified that required that at-will employees live within the city limits. This pertained to roughly 10 employees, as the balance of the employees are in the union and they have different requirements. Since that time, I've been here since 2021, and with the current labor market, we've been having trouble hiring those positions. For instance, for the Director of Public Works position, it took 2 years to find Scott Livermore. And currently we're struggling to find a codes administrator. That position has a lot of specific certifications that we are not able to find within city limits. So what we are proposing is revising the ordinance to say that residency is preferred for at-will employees. This would be reflected in job postings. If we had the choice between two candidates of equal qualification, we would of course grant the position to a city resident as opposed to somebody from the outside. This actually will be changed for the second reading per norm to indicate that we're revising the ordinance as opposed to creating a new one. So, any questions?
Thank you, Molly. This was reviewed in Public Works, Mrs. Katz.
Yes, it was. It did come to Public Works. And we did have a discussion on where we were going with residency. One of the questions that I have is that when we've had hires in the past 2 to 3 years, there were a couple of people that we they applied for jobs in the city, gotten the jobs, and they also stated that they would move into the city. Now, that didn't happen with a couple of people. Now, does that have to do with, since we're going to change this to preferred, does that have anything to do with the ones that said they were going to move into the city and didn't move into the city? Does that have any, yes, Mayor?
Or did you want to go?
No.
I'm not sure which ones you're referencing as to who we hired in the last that has not moved in. But moving forward, because I think everybody's in, including actually our police chief now is within the city, who actually is not required to be in the city, but he did find a place in city limits. And obviously we're going to continue. So everybody else, Molly's in the city, Scott's in the city. Of course, all of our directors have to be in the city. We did make an exception, which we discussed with community development. Other than that, everybody else in the city. But yes, moving forward, preferred, and I think as we discussed, we still are going to highly advocate for people to live in the city. I think we all want, obviously, our employees to live in the city. I think the key point is with the labor market and just to allow us to have leverage to get the most qualified and competent individual. But if they're in the city, that's great. If they're not, we will, during the interview, and if they're a successful candidate, let them know that we really strongly prefer that they move within the city if they're not already.
Number one, I want to thank you, Chief, for moving into the city. Well appreciated. Taxpayers appreciate it from the standpoint of taxpayers of the city pay all of our salaries. And it's very important that the people that run our city, taxpayers feel comfortable knowing that everybody's passionate about living here and that they know that they're committed to the city. Mayor, we've worked on this for a long time. And, we have problems in other areas, say the school district and other areas, making sure that people do move into our city. We're proud of our city. We are excited about where our city has come and we want to see it moving forward successfully. And the sad thing is that we are losing population. We are not bringing in enough money tax-wise to pay all of our expenses. So everybody that moves into the city, be it a homeowner, be it a business, whatever, every penny counts. And this is what we're looking for. And that's why I'm adamant about this. I really am. I've been passionate about this for years. As far as preferred, yes, we want the best candidate possible. We all want that. We know how important that is to the administration and to the city to make sure we have the best people working for us. So I can understand preferred. I understand where we're going with employment in the country at this point. It's not only us, it's all over. So, but again, and I'm happy that you're going to look at the candidates and I'm happy that you're going to take into consideration if you live in the city, you get first priority if it's apples to apples.
Yes.
I defer to my committee at this point.
Any other comments or questions from Public Works members?
Nope, not at this time.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from other members?
Just one quick comment, and I can completely understand the hiring headaches. when it comes to that. This is a very tough one to agree to because obviously we appreciate the fact that department heads are within the city. But understand that we don't want to ask somebody to uproot their family should they have kids in school and have to change districts and so on. So I see the plus of this as well. So thank you very much for bringing it to us.
Thank you.
You can see none. Mrs. Frank on the motion for first reading.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion for first reading passes 6-0.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Molly. We're gonna jump down to the bottom quick. I was not aware. We have a couple other guests online. We'll move to item 19, a lot consolidation for 2300 West Fourth Street. Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Motion and a second. Gary, good evening. Thanks for the note.
Appreciate
My
it.
apologies to you and the developers on. I wasn't aware they were.
I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good evening, members of council. What I present to you is no group. Four Street is they have two parcels, which is parcel 6501201 and 6501212. They're requesting to consolidate both of them. Several months ago, the northern parcel, which was 913 Poplar Street, came before you for a demolition for this general purposes. So at this point in time, like I said, they're requesting to combine them so that they can move forward with the expansion of the facility up there in Newberry. It was reviewed by county as well as planning. The comments from county, the plans that you have in front of you are corrected copies.
Thank you, Mr. Nar. Are there any comments or questions on the lot consolidation from members of council? Mrs. Katz?
They keep on expanding this place.
Correct.
I think it's fantastic for Newberry. I really do. I mean, are they expanding the store or just a parking lot?
It will be both the store and a parking lot. The northern parcel is going to be primarily the parking, but they are going to expand. I believe it's about 1,500 square feet. So they'll be doing a remodel of the facility, which makes it more advantageous for what they can offer the people of that area.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Gary.
Yep, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, it's great to see the continued investment. So thank you to both of these organizations for their investments in the city. Mrs. Frank, on the vote for item 19, please.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey.
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Motion
Mr. Yoder.
passes 6-0. We'll move to item 20, a demolition for 164 Maynard Street, which is the former Williamsport Foundry. Is there a motion in a second?
So moved.
Motion in a second, Mr. Nar.
What we have before you, again, at the property is 164 Maynard Street. They are requesting a demo of the old foundry, and the purpose of that is for the future development of that area. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nar. Any comments or questions from members of council? This is related to the development that we voted on the end of last year. It's great to see that they're moving fast on this. It's very good to see.
They
that.
are.
They are moving very fast. That's what we like to see.
Mr. Nar, any specific environmental concerns considering what that building was?
That's what they are required. That's what they're required to do, and they've already started that process.
Nice, very nice. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion for item 20.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Gary, thank you very much. And again, to for Invest, thank you very much for the partnership and for investing. We will move back up to, I think that's everybody that's visiting us. If there's not, somebody text me or wave or something. We'll move up to item 11, Mrs. Frank.
An ordinance in first reading, a transfer ordinance number 1 for 2023.
Is there a motion in a second?
So moved.
Motion in a second. This is Mrs. Woodring's transfer ordinance. Which I believe, here, I'll let her introduce it. Good evening, Mrs. Woodring. and Happy New Year. Good to see you.
Thank you. Same to you. Good evening, President Yoder, members of council, and Mayor Slaughter. I would like to purchase a printer for the office. Therefore, I'm asking for your approval of a transfer of $200 from supplies, which is 3010-61010 account, to equipment, which is 3010-64040, which is account. This was brought before the Finance Committee and given a positive recommendation.
Thank you, Peg. This was reviewed in finance. Mr. Allison, you care to?
Yes, we did
Upper
review
finances.
it. We responded positively about
Yes.
your need and everything, but we didn't vote, so we didn't give a recommendation, but yeah, it's a functional needed piece, and there wasn't much discussion other than, yeah, you need it.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion for item 11.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes, motion passes 6-0. We'll move to item 12.
resolution to authorize submission of an application for phase 2 of the strategic management planning program funding.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Motion and a second, Mayor Slaughter.
Yes,
welcome
good
back.
evening again, President Yoder, Vice President Katz, member of the council. This is literally the same exact resolution that we had a few weeks ago between us and letting them know that we're ready to move forward with phase 2 of the strategic planning. Nothing has changed financially. When we initially submitted it, DCD said it was fine. They were okay with the template. And then as soon as I sent the signed version back that council adopted, they came back and said, actually, we changed our mind. We like this template better. So nothing has changed, literally nothing, just literally the format of the paragraphs in the resolution is the only change. There's been no change financially. The DCD just emailed and said, could you just have council switch it to this format? So that's literally it. That's all we're doing. So just a formality, literally. So
Thank you, Mayor Slaughter. Mr. Allison for finance, anything to add?
No thing.
I was expecting finance to be a little bit more meaty. That's all right, though. Any comments or questions? Here you see none. Mrs. Frank on the motion for item 12.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Item 13, Mrs. Frank.
resolution authorizing execution of an agreement between the city of Williamsport and River Valley Transit Authority.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Mayor Slaughter, the floor is yours again.
Yes, good evening again. This is an agreement between us and RVTA. In the interim here, as we obviously are working through the assets and the buildings, this agreement right here makes sure that ensures that we have insurance coverage during that process. And so I know we've discussed this the last little bit to make sure as we're working through the process that the buildings remain insured and all of that. So that's what this agreement is. Austin worked on it on our side. Joe Nagy and the folks in RVTA and Tracy was as well. So I think it's 5 parcels, I believe, that's included in this agreement.
Thank you, Mayor Slaughter. This was also reviewed in finance. Anything to add, Finance Committee?
Not really. We're just doing our due diligence and making sure that those properties are covered during this transition period.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Any other comments or questions from other members of council? Hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please, for item 13.
Mr. Allen.
Yes.
Mr. Mackey, Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz,
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. We'll move to item 14.
Resolution, City of Williamsport, Lake Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, authorizing the issuance and sale of a tax and revenue anticipation note of the city in the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2023 determining the principal amount of such note and the form and terms of such note, authorizing the award of such note, and making certain other determinations in connection therewith.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Mayor Slaughter, I presume you're.
Yep, I'll handle this one.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tracy's unavailable this evening.
No
Yes, good evening again. This is the TRAN that was discussed during budget. I believe Councilwoman Muley brought it up. So this is the TRAN here. It was discussed in finance, and Tracy noted that she does not anticipate that we will be needing the TRAN at all this year. But obviously it's good to have in place just in case. I believe it's a $2 million TRAN. So that'll be there in the event that we do need it. But it's looking so far that we will not.
Thank you,
And
Mayor.
it's with M&T.
Oh, Gotcha. Thank you, Mayor Slaughter. This was also reviewed in finance, Mr. Allison.
Yes, we did. It was good news to hear from Tracy that she didn't anticipate we're gonna have to dip into it. The reason this with M&T is because they're the only bank that would do it. Others turned it down because our audits aren't done yet. So they have, this was the only opportunity. Should we draw down, the interest rate is 5.75%, I believe. So significantly higher than we're used to for this kind of thing. So we definitely hope we don't have to use it.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Are there any other comments or questions from other members? Mayor Slaughter, where are we at with the audit? I know that's been a ongoing thing. Can you provide us
It
an
is.
update on where that's?
I know Tracy has been working very closely with them to get through the 2019. I can provide a deeper update in 2 weeks if you would like. I can have Tracy get that together. But I know she's in 2019, obviously, and working through that entire process. And so we're hopeful to have that. I don't really want to give a timeline, but hopefully sooner rather than later. But yeah, they're working very closely with Zelenkowski, Axelrod, to get that 2019 completed, and then we can get to 2020,
2021 and now 2022.
So yeah, it's been a little bit of a process, obviously, but we're getting there. But I can have Tracy provide an update on that.
Yeah, I'll reach out to Miss Mealy. That wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe have a update discussion in finance, but I'll make sure she's comfortable with
Sure.
that and aware of that if you're okay with.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi.
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes, motion passes 6-0. We'll move to item 16.
resolution awarding an agreement between the city of Williamsport and Choice Carpet Cleaners.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second. Mr. Sander, welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Good evening again. This is simply a cleaning contract for our city buildings. Trade and Transit 1, Trade and Transit 2, obviously the city portions only, Police Patrol and Public Works Building. This was run for roughly 3 or 4 weeks, paper contract. That's I'm sitting down here, and also Public Works. Put in the paper twice, and our current cleaner Choice, we're the only ones that threw a bid in on it. So this contract is for $45,900, and we paid from facility maintenance, and this was discussed in Public Works on Tuesday.
Thank you, Mr. Sander. This was reviewed in Public Works. Mrs. Katz?
Yes, it was. There's no more really to say. And thank you, John. The look on his face, he thought I was gonna go on.
Any other comments or questions from other members of council? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion for item 16.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder,
Yes, motion passes 6-0. We'll move to, thank you, John. We'll move to item 17, Mrs. Frank.
resolution authorizing articles of agreement between the city of Williamsport and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development Governor's Center for Local Government Services.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second. Motion and a second.
And President Yoder, members of the council, administration. What you have before you is a resolution authorizing DCED to facilitate a meeting with the city, the Bureau of Fire, Old Lake County Township, and Old Lake County Township Fire Company to update our alliance agreement since it's been since 1999 at no cost. This is basically providing evidence to the DCED that the city does not object to them facilitating the meetings.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Lucas. John, my apologies. I, for whatever reason, thought this was from Skip, which is why I went to ERC, so. This did go to ERC though.
It did.
Mr. Biter.
When I started reading it, I scratched my head and thought, well, okay,
Well, hey, we saved one meeting and, a little bit of advertising.
We did.
So,
we did. As the mayor already mentioned, DCED likes to change things up. And I'm very happy that they're getting involved right away on this. A couple of the comments that were made by Chief Lucas, obviously this agreement with Old Lake County Township has been in place since 1999. It's been a fantastic agreement for both municipalities. We do have other municipalities, specifically those with all volunteer forces that want to join this agreement as well. But for that to happen, we need to get all our ducks involved, help the state understand and predicament that a third-class city is in, being required to have a fire department, and also the burden it puts on that requirement when you have local municipalities that are not under the same restrictions. So doing this and getting this on a solid foundation is going to be paramount for regionalization going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Biter. I would second that. This is great to see. Looking forward to seeing the fruits of this. Thank you for jumping on this. I think we can learn a lot from this and apply this in other areas of the city as well. I'm hoping we can do that as well. So thank you very much. Any comments or questions from other members of council? Okay, hearing and seeing none, Mrs. Frank on the motion for item 17, please.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Biter,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. Thank you, Chief Lucas.
Yeah, thank you. I just want, why it was, since it's voted on, I just want to remind everyone our next meeting is going to be on January 11th at 5 o'clock in person at Lycoming Township Municipal Building. So hopefully some members of the council can be there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move to item 18, Mrs. Frank.
Resolution authorizing the purchase of Arctic Wolf Managed Direction and Security Response Solution from CDW-G.
Is there a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Mr. Black?
Good evening, President Yoder, other members of council. What I have here is a resolution authorizing us to purchase the solution from Arctic Wolf Software that will give us a little bit more of an edge between us and the outside world as far as cybersecurity goes. This is a good, big, huge first step in what's needed in just locking this place down. It goes for a total of $62,615.79. That is comes out of contracted services. That will be an annual fee. And this was discussed in finance and approved by council, or reviewed, I should say, by council.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Allison, this was reviewed in finance.
Yes, we did. Security is of IT security and internet security and everything that goes with that is of utmost importance now. Everybody knows that, and there's a price to it, a price tag. Mr. Black, he did his research and said this company is top notch. They have the best service. So we're going to get our bang for the buck, which is peace of mind. Really, is what it comes down to. Although a breach in security could have all kinds of material implications. So we don't want that really. So we didn't vote, of course, but we had a good discussion about it.
Thank you, Mr. Allison.
Yeah, there's a lot of technical details that I'm not versed in, but there are a lot of endpoints that this covers, you know, not just a few, but hundreds. So it's well needed.
Allison. Any comments or questions from other members of council?
Just to say that this fills a lot of gaps that we knew we had in our coverage.
Yes.
And the insurance company identified last year when we voted on that. So this is also helping with that.
Thank you, Mr. Biter.
It really cuts down our exposure.
Yes. Any other comments or questions? Hearing seen none, Mrs. Frank on the motion, please.
Thank you.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Mackey,
Yes.
Mr. Pelisi,
Yes.
Mr. Bider,
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Yoder.
Yes, motion passes 6-0. I've got nothing on the agenda to accept for filing, so I think we're good there. Correct, Mrs. Frank?
I'm sorry.
I don't have anything on the agenda for except for filing. We're not doing that today, correct?
No, nothing.
All right, we'll move to item 22, announcements. Our next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be in 2 weeks, Thursday, January 19th, right here at 7 p.m. Upcoming board ranges from the committees on times. The meetings here will follow, but we might have one from public safety. So I would, if the public wants to watch that, just double check online and the advertising, we can re-advertise that, but finance, Tuesday, January 17th at 1 p.m., Public Works, 2:30 p.m., Wednesday, January 18th, 10 a.m. Blighted Property Review, 9 a.m. ERC, 11:30 a.m. Public Safety, but that will likely change depending on the discussion from the committee. And Thursday, January 19th, 10:30 a.m. is our zoning hearing board. Open the floor for comments. Item 23 from City Council. I have a couple. We have a couple of retirements in the police department. Donna Bauer, Brenda Carnes are retiring. They've been with the city for a long time. They've given us a long, amazing level of service. I just wanted to wish them well in their retirement, and thank them for their service to the police department and the city. I believe you're in the process of, or have backfilled them. They've got big shoes to fill, but I'm confident you'll select good people who will be up to the task. There was a public comment that was sent in to the city clerk. They had a shoulder surgery and they unfortunately could not make it here. And so, given their physical limitations, I said that I would read it in record. I don't know if I should do it here or members of the public. I'll just do it here quick. Mr. Mike Toten saw the article in today's paper about residency and job applications, stated that his daughter lives in the city and owns property in the city, has a bachelor's degree, and had applied for the last 2 positions that became open with the police. She did not receive a call or get an interview or notification. Made it clear that she was qualified. Mr. Toten was upset that a resident did not receive a phone call and noted that he agreed of the position of Mrs. Katz took on residency. So we had a good discussion on that. Certainly, hopefully, we can continue to put a focus on hiring city residents that are qualified. And maybe that's something we look at if there's some additional language we want to change to give the administration the leniency that they need. But I'm sure that we get preference for city residents as well. So, and then just wanted to wish everybody a happy new year. I'm looking forward to working with all 7 or other 6 of you, the 5 of you that are here today. Excited for what 2023 is going to bring. So any other comments from members of council? Mr. Mackey.
If it's okay, I mean, we could just figure this public safety out right now.
Sure.
Ms. Katz, if you're okay with moving it back to Tuesdays at 11:30,
Sure.
that would accommodate my schedule. So we can
Okay.
just say public safety's back to Tuesdays at 11:30.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm good with it too.
Sorry, I talked to Vince about this 10 seconds ago.
I'm just teasing
I
there.
thought you ignored him.
It's the start of a new year. I want to do it right.
That's all right. Any other comments from members of city council? Any comments from the administration tonight? Okay, any comments from members of the public? Yep, welcome up. State your name and address for the record, please. And you will have 3 minutes. Happy New Year, Mr. Stucco.
Frank Steckel, 619 First Ave. I came in here a while back and informed council that there were trees and brush pushed out into an alley so bad that after time, the city paved around them. Nobody's done anything about it, to the best of my knowledge. It's actually a criminal act. It's a codes enforcement act. And I've told you people about it. If somebody gets hurt there, the city will be liable to some extent because they haven't acted on it. So, and not only that, but I think by not acting on it and being in a position where you can act on it, I think it's probably a criminal act on your part and possibly the administration's part, because you've been made aware of a dangerous situation, a criminal situation. It's actually not a civil but criminal situation, and you haven't acted on it. So I think that would be probably collusion, obstruction of justice. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I tell you who is an attorney, and that's the district attorney of Lycoming County. I'll be contacting his office Monday or Tuesday. I'll give you a couple of days. I want somebody to get back to me, so I don't make a fool of myself when I call him. I think there are enough fools around here. Similar situation happened once before when a piece of 8-foot copper was blowing around the top of the building over there, the old courthouse building where we had our meetings. And nobody did anything about that for a long time. And eventually it disappeared. I don't know if it blew off like the previous one did or what, but I did tell council if somebody was killed, I would seek that they were negligent homicide charges. While half a block away in that mural parking lot, a piece of plywood did blow off and hit a car and did severe damage. If it hit a person, it would have severely injured them or killed them. The same half block. All right. So I suggest you something about her. And to the Sun Gazette, I would like to see them print something about this, because it kind of goes to show the state of affairs, I think, in our community, that somebody comes in on their own, complains, makes council and the administration aware of a dangerous situation. People walk the alley all the time. It's between 2nd and 3rd Campbell and Maynard. It's one of the busiest traffic alleys in the city. And you have a situation that's so out of hand. It's so ridiculous. The brush is growing from a private property. The city doesn't have to pay to have it fixed. The property owner fixes it. And it's pushed so far in the alley that the city actually paved around the alley. Is there anybody here would say that's ridiculous? Just nod your head. Yeah, I know you don't want to talk. There you go. I think that's a yay. Can you do something about that? You can nod your head if you like, because I know you don't like to talk to people.
John, Derek, do you have the address that Mr. Stucco was talking about? I was of the impression that somebody from the administration went out and looked at it.
Yeah, I believe Scott.
Scott Livermore does. Okay. I was of the impression that it was either Scott or John. One of you went and looked at it.
Yeah.
It was a year ago, more.
You brought this to our attention about 6 or 8 weeks ago.
6 or 8 weeks
No,
ago.
the street item.
The street item.
Yeah.
It was, no, it wasn't 6 or 8 weeks ago. I believe it was.
Yeah, it was.
Really?
Yes, it was.
I'd like to see that. I think it was a lot more than that.
Well,
Seems to me it was last summer.
We'll check the record.
Yeah,
But
okay.
Derek, you're aware of it. Thank you very much.
But there is a record too.
If
with
there
this.
is anything from council's perspective we can do to help with that, please let us know. Thank you for raising it to our attention, Mr. Stucco. And your time is up.
Was my time up?
And yes,
But wait,
there is a
you were
legal time
talking-
limit, 3 minutes.
But you're talking during my time. Don't I get
Your
that?
time was up right when I started talking. I waited
It
until
was?
the end out of respect for you.
Tell me
Are
something.
there any other comments from the public, please?
That's rude.
You're rude.
Am I rude?
Yes. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. I appreciate your care for the city. Any other comments or questions or excuse me, comments from the public? Okay, motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very
Aye.
much. Everybody have a good evening and a happy new year. Everybody else was for it, so